Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone, based on your time, John. Welcome in Salesforce Epics Hour. My name is Amit. I'm your host, and today we have a great speaker, Alba, with us. She is going to talk about the latest Lightning Web Component feature. So let me hand over to her for her introduction and the presentation. Over to you.
Hi, everyone, and Amit, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a pleasure for me to collaborate with you. And also, I have to say that I've seen the videos in your channel are super popular, and I keep receiving questions in the videos after a long time, and I really appreciate that, how active is your community. So I'm very glad to be able to contribute to it again. And I hope that you enjoy today's presentation. Okay, so today we're going to talk about Lightning Web Components. Lightning Web Components is a feature that has been evolving on and on during the last years. And in every release, the product team, creates new functionalities for developers, new technologies that we can use in our Lightning Web Components, and that it's important to know because they can really make a difference at the time of developing something new, right? First of all, I wanted to say that you should ask any questions that you have in the chat window. Take advantage of me being here, not in person, but in real time. I'm going to be taking a look at the chat. So if you have any questions, please put them there and I will make sure to to respond them. So these are my contact details also for those people who are watching the presentation asynchronously, in case that you want to ask me anything later. And with that, I want to start by talking about something that the LWC product team does every year, which I think it's really, really interesting for developers, which is the LWC survey. The LWC survey is like a form that you need to complete with several questions. And in that survey, they try to get feedback from the developers who are working with LWC to see which features they need. And then the product team is using the results of that survey to prioritize their roadmap, which is amazing because they are listening to developers and they are working on the features that developers love the most or need the most, better said. So this year, the survey is going to be released very, very soon. And I will make sure to share it with you, Amit. So your developers, the Apex Hours developers, can take a look at it and give feedback to us. These were the results of that survey last year. And as you see, one of the features that was the one that was the most requested feature was dynamic components. And then it was the workspace API. And then we can take a look at the list here better. It was lightning actions, dependency injection, and more. So the team has been working in these last releases in these features ordered by priority, and they have made generally available some of them, such as dynamic components and workspace API, and they are working on other features such as lightning actions and the other features in the roadmap. I know that lightning out is being worked out as well, and we're going to have some information about that at Trailblazer DX if you are attending. Great. So today we have an hour to talk, so I decided to go back to releases. So we are going to go back to summer 23. We are going to take a look at 3 of the features that I consider the most interesting from that release for LWC, which are Light DOM, the Refresh View API, and the Style Sheets property. Then we're going to take a look at the winter 24 release, and we're going to take a look at two features, which are GraphQL wire adapter and dynamic components. Remember, number one in the survey. And I have to say that in that release, there were some innovations for Experience Cloud that I won't explain today just because I don't have 2 hours to talk, but I have 2 YouTube videos that you can watch. And don't worry about taking notes or screenshots or anything, because I will share this deck after the presentation so you can go to all the links and continue learning. Finally, we will cover what's new in Spring 24, which are 3 features that are becoming GA. All the features that we are going to cover are GA. You can use them in production today. And the features that are becoming GA in Spring 24, which is the release that is being deployed right now, are the Workspace API, the Record Picker component, and the Instrumentation API. Great. So let's start talking about one of our summer 23 features, which was Lights Dome. So Lights Dome is a kind of complex feature. It is difficult to understand it because you need to have very clear in mind what is Shadow DOM. You need to understand that Salesforce created a synthetic Shadow DOM, which is the one that we are currently using, although the native Shadow DOM, like supporting native Shadow DOM in our components, it's something that the LWC team is working on currently, and they are making a big effort, and that's going to be available very soon. Indeed, you can already adopt it for some of the components. And yeah, and you need to understand all those concepts to really grasp what LightDOM is in depth. But I'm going to try to give you an overview of it, and then if you want to know more, I will refer you to a blog that I wrote in which I explain all the details about it. And also in one of the Experience Cloud videos, I demoed LightDOM and I explain all these details that you need to know first. But again, it would be an 1 hour explanation if I need to explain it from scratch. So simplifying it quite a lot, what is LightDOM? It's a new mechanism that we have introduced in Lightning Web Component that allows you to relax the Shadow DOM restrictions. So Shadow DOM is like a box in which you enclose your components so that they are encapsulated and so that external JavaScript or external CSS cannot like enter the component, right? And what we do with LightDOM is to relax that restriction so that from the outside, we are able to query the internals of that component and work with them. And we are able to also traverse that shadow boundary with our CSS styles. This is useful in 2 main use cases, although there are 2 more. So the 2 main use cases are when you want to use an analytics library, because analytics library like Google Analytics need to have access to those internal DOM elements to know if they were clicked or not, right? And because of that, if you want to use, for instance, analytics in your Experience Cloud site, it is an option to activate LightDOM in your components and make them open. Then the second most relevant use case is CSS. Although there are mechanisms to import CSS within your components with Shadow DOM, which are enclosed in a Shadow DOM, and there is an alternative way to do that, but some customers prefer to load CSS styles globally and let them go down in the hierarchy of components of the DOM. And if you want that to happen, you can activate also light DOM. At the same time, you're breaking encapsulation. Activating light DOM has security implications. So it is important to really understand what you are doing and do it with care. There are two more use cases, which are these two here. You can use Light DOM to implement deeply nested components like easily. For instance, typical example, a data table with rows, right? You could open the DOM of the rows so that the interaction between the table and the rows is easier. And also it helps with accessibility. You can read more about that in the blog that I published. Here I have two not recommended tags in the global styling use case, and I would like to explain why that is. So the thing is that applying global styling, I mean, letting other global styles style your components in Experience Cloud site that you fully control, it's okay because you have the full control of what's being exposed on that page. But when you are building components in Lightning Experience and Salesforce mobile app, remember that customers can modify those pages and they can include components that come from other vendors, correct? So in those cases, security is more important, and you may want to think about it twice before opening your components styles. Okay, so what's the best way to learn about Light DOM and about any of the features that we are going to see today, about all of them, sorry, is taking a look at our LWC recipes app, because we have created examples for all the use cases. So this is an org in which I have installed LWC recipes. I'm going to make the screen a little bit bigger. Okay. And there is a tab called Light DOM. In this tab, you are going to find one component in which we are enclosing another component, a child component, in which we have opened the DOM, okay? Like activating Light DOM is you need to do it by component. It's not something that you activate at the page level or something like that. It's something that you need to do on each individual component. So without Light DOM, if we would try to access the internal elements of these components from the outside, it wouldn't work. But thanks to Light DOM, we can access this element and maybe change the text, or maybe we could do something else. That's the use case for using an analytics library that needs to access components internal. If we go to the code, we can see that the way in which we activate Light DOM, okay, this is the parent. Let me open the child, which is this one. Okay, there it is. Let me make this a little bit bigger. And let's go to the JavaScript file. Okay, so the way to do that is you write in your component static render mode light, and that's it. Okay, with that, your component should be Light DOM enabled. And again, this works in Experience Cloud and also in Lightning Experience. I leave you here the resources that I mentioned that you can review if you want to know more about this topic. Any questions so far? Okay, so if you have questions, please put them in the chat. Again, take advantage that I'm here and I can answer or try to answer all your questions. So next feature that we're going to cover from the summer 23 release is Refresh View API. So Refresh View API allows you to refresh components, individual components, without having to refresh the whole page. This is kind of equivalent to force refresh view, which was also a very much requested feature. What happens is that it was released before the before last year's survey went out, and that is why it is not on the results, because it was already delivered. But we know it was very much requested by developers, and that's why the product team decided to work on it. I'm seeing here a question. Thank you, Kevin, for your question, which is, which one is the default, light or shadow? The default is shadow DOM, and it is the default because Lightning Web Components implement web components standards, like vanilla web component standards. And having a shadow DOM is part of those web component standards, and it adds encapsulation, which is something that on the Salesforce platform is very convenient, because we have this use case in which a page can contain components that have been developed by different companies, and we want them to be as secure and as encapsulated as possible. Let's say that Light DOM is something that allows you to relax that restriction, but it should be used with security in mind, only under certain justified use cases. So getting back to the refresh view API, it's like force refresh view, but it works slightly different, because in this case, if you want a component to be refreshed when it listens to that event, you need to register a refresh handler. It's like more controlled, okay? Also, it has more flexibility, because as part of that refresh process, you can add a callback method, something that is going to execute after the refresh has happened, and that was not available in force refresh view. There are also some status definition that you can use to have also like more control of the different phases under which your component is going. And yeah, and something important is that the base components, LWC base components, such as Lightning data table, Lightning input, etc., are registered for refresh. So if you fire a refresh event, the base components that you're using are going to refresh by default. Okay. So for this, I don't know why I don't have a demo slide here, but it should be here. So let's go to LWC recipes again, and let's take a look at the demo. So in LWC recipes, you're going to find another tab which says refresh view. In this tab, this is a base component, which is a list view. And then this is a custom component that I have created. And here in this component, we are allowing to create accounts. And when the account is created, we are dispatching a refresh event. As base components are subscribed, this component should update automatically. Sorry, my camera switched off. I'm having problems with my camera. 1 second. Okay, let's use this camera instead. I got a new camera, but it doesn't work very well. Hope that you can hear me and see me correctly. Okay, so I was mentioning that this component here is going to refresh because it is a base component, and also this one because I have registered the component to be refreshed. So let's create one account. For instance, we are going to create the Apex hours account and take a look at that. So the list view was refreshed, and also this number was refreshed. So let me show you how the dispatch works. So basically what we do is to import refresh event from Lightning Refresh. Okay. And then once the account has been created, we dispatch that new refresh event. That's okay. And then if we take a look at the code for this component, I recently added it and is not on the main branch of LWC recipes yet, but it will be soon, okay? It's on a branch that I'm working on. But let's take a look at it. We can see the committee here. Okay, so this is the component that gets refreshed. So what do I need to do to register for a refresh? I need to import a register refresh handler function and also an unregistered one. And I need to register in the connected callback and unregister in the disconnected callback. And that's it. That way, once the refresh event is listened, the handler that you define here will be executed. In my case, that refresh handler is refreshing Apex to retrieve that number of accounts from the backend. I see a comment on the chat from Thomas saying the numbers don't match. 18 is in list, 19 in the component at the bottom. Really? I didn't realize that. Actually, I don't know why, because let me see. Here I'm retrieving that number with with select count from account with user mode, which should return the same number as the list view. So I'm not sure why. I cannot tell you right now, but I will take a look at it and add maybe a comment on the video, okay? It must be some permissions weird glitch that I cannot think of right now. There is another question on the chat. This time it's from Rishanth Kumar. And the question is, will the refresh event update standard components too? Yeah, we have just seen that. So for instance, let's say that here I create an account which is Rishanth. Okay, take a look at this component. This is a standard component, okay? It's refreshing. Now we have 19, so it refreshed. Okay, fantastic. So again, if you want to take a look at this code now, it's on a different branch, but it will be merged into LWC recipes very soon. And I also leave you here the documentations and a video. Great. So let's take a look at another feature that was a little bit ignored. I haven't heard many people talking about it, but I think it's a nice feature, which is the new style sheets property. The new style sheets property allows you to include additional style sheets in your component. So by default, the component is going to include the CSS, so the CSS file that has the same name of the component in the component folder, correct? With this style sheets property, you can have more CSS files in the component folder and you can include them in your component. So it allows you for a better modularization of your CSS style sheets. And this is one of the features one of the reasons I was saying before that you don't really need to open Light DOM to have a good design of your CSS files, your CSS styles, and how you use them in your components. Because even if you include the CSS styles in multiple components at the same time, browsers load those styles in a smart way. They are not going to load it like many times. They are going to load it only once. So you can achieve kind of the same result just by importing your CSS classes into each individual component. Okay, and there is also a feature that allows you to store that CSS in a third component, so you can reuse it, and so you don't have to copy the file, but that's an older feature. Okay, so with this feature, let's say that we have my component CSS, but we want to include also 2 more files. Now we can do it. And again, we are going to LWC recipes and take a look at that. So here in LWC recipes, we have styling tab. This is a new tab. And I moved here the styling hooks recipe that you probably know, and I added a new recipe for style sheets. Let's take a look at it. So we can see that we have here the CSS file of the component, but we have one more file, which is our text styles. And this file is the one that is giving that fancy color to the font and that is changing the font family, okay? In the other file, the component one, we are just setting the background color, but the font is being set on the additional style sheets. So how do we use them? Very easy. We just import the styles and we assign them to the style sheets property. That's it. Easy, right? This is the font that I was referring to. Okay. Any questions so far regarding style sheets? Then I will continue. I leave you here the repo, the link to the repo, to the recipes in the repo, and the documentation. Okay, so let's go 3 months later and start talking about our winter 24 release. Is the release that you have in your production orgs right now, but very, very soon you're going to have the spring release, correct? So one of the greatest and biggest innovations of that release was the GraphQL wire adapter. I think you have had a session at Apex Hours about this, but I will give you a quick overview. So first of all, the GraphQL wire adapter sends query to the Salesforce GraphQL API. The Salesforce GraphQL API was released before the wire adapter, okay, like 2 releases before, I believe. And the GraphQL API is a new API that we built because we wanted like a new, very performant way to retrieve records, especially for building UIs and for Lightning Web Components. And GraphQL is not something that Salesforce has invented. It's something that has been there for some time, from 2015, and it was really created by Facebook. So why did Facebook create the GraphQL API specification? Because you know how the Facebook mobile app works, right? You go there and you start taking a look at your feed and you need to retrieve, so the app needs to retrieve information from your friends and what they are posting and so on. And you start scrolling and you start like retrieving more and more data, correct? So they wanted to create like a new way of doing things, a new way of retrieving data from the backend that was very performant for that specific use case. And that's why they decided to create this API. The most important takeaway or thing to remember from the GraphQL API is that there is a single endpoint to which you send your queries, and it is the client, the one that builds the query. So the story changes a little bit, because so far, if you wanted to create a query in Salesforce, the query needed to be created in Apex. Then you needed to expose a method that was doing that query, and then you needed to query Apex to retrieve that information. There were some alternatives, which are the wire adapters, like the wire REST adapters, which are the ones that have been available for some time, but they are not super flexible. There are not many available, and they allow you to retrieve records, for instance, in a specific way, or update records in a specific way, but you cannot like build your queries or your DML operations in the way that you want. However, with the GraphQL wire adapter and the GraphQL API, we're going to see that this is possible. In addition, it has a lot of benefits. For instance, it is schema-driven, which means that there is an endpoint that you can reach to get like information about the data model that's behind the API. So for instance, if you ask, give me the S objects that are available, it's with a different syntax and naming, but there is an endpoint that allows you to basically do that. It's like an object describe in Salesforce, and that allows customers and developers to create tooling, because that tooling can like discover by querying the API what's behind the API. And also is widely adopted in the third-party developer community. So as I mentioned, the GraphQL API was made GA in winter 23. And what we have made GA in winter 24 is the GraphQL wire adapter. So something to bear in mind. The GraphQL API, as of today, allows you to perform queries and also mutations. Mutations are operations that modify the database, such as create, update, or delete. But mutations is in beta, and that's on the API. But the GraphQL wire adapter only supports queries, not mutations for now, okay? That will come in the future. So what's the GraphQL wire adapter? It's wire adapter that you can use in LWC to retrieve data through the GraphQL API to retrieve records, to get records. It has many benefits because, first of all, in GraphQL queries, you can combine queries to multiple objects and send everything in a single server round trip. So send everything in a single request. So you retrieve the data in a single server round trip, which makes it very efficient. Now I guess you understand more the Facebook use case. Also, the wire adapter has been built on top of the Lightning Data Service cache. And that cache is the same one that the wire REST adapters use. This means that if, for instance, you retrieve a record with the get record wire adapter, which is one of the old ones, that record is going to be stored in the cache. And then if in a later moment you try to retrieve the same record with the GraphQL wire adapter, the record may still be in the cache and may be retrieved from there. So it's very, very efficient. And also it's been designed with the mobile offline use case in mind. This is because it works with the Lightning Data Service cache. When you are working for mobile, on mobile offline use cases, when you lose network connectivity, if your records are in the cache, you are going to still continue be able to working with them. This is just a comparison of the different methods through which you can retrieve data in LWC as of today, okay? Apex is like the most basic one is it allows you for a lot of customization, but at the same time, you need to code a lot to get an Apex method exposed, and you need to, I mean, you expose an Apex method, and probably the next time that you need to perform a different query, you need to create a new method and expose it as well. So it's kind of hard to make something very scalable, right, with just Apex. Then with the LDS REST wire adapters, which are get record, update record, and so on, this improved because you don't need to write Apex code, but at the same time, we don't have much flexibility because we can only get record, update record, get a subject info, and a few more things. However, with the GraphQL wire adapter, the client can write the queries that it needs to retrieve the data from the server without Apex and with all the flexibility. So it's very, very useful. And also, okay, the synchronization capabilities that the Lightning Data Service cache has only apply to wire adapters, okay? Although I'm thinking that you can actually cache Apex request. So this no is not correct, okay? I will change it. Yeah, and something else. The GraphQL syntax has some benefits over SQL. The GraphQL syntax has advanced capabilities such as directives and fragments that allow you to reuse your queries or chunks of your queries in other queries and allow you to give you a lot of flexibility. At the same time, the way in which it does pagination is also better. Well, there are many, many benefits. I recommend you, if you're interested in this topic, to watch the video that I'm going to leave you here because it's a full 1-hour session in which I talked solely about the GraphQL wire adapter or the GraphQL. It was only the GraphQL API, I believe, by that time, but I explained all those features and it's very interesting. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples. And again, here we are in our famous LWC recipes app. Great. So here we have some recipes that explain many of the GraphQL API capabilities, and they are all implemented using the wire adapter. I'm going to show you the code for this one so that you understand one reason because of which I think GraphQL is so powerful. So here we are seeing accounts and contacts, correct? So if we take a look at the code, it is only one query, what we are doing here, okay? We are doing a query that retrieves accounts and retrieves contacts. And these accounts and contacts are unrelated. They don't have any relationship. But because we can chain queries or combine queries in a single request, this is very efficient because we just send a request to the backend, to the GraphQL API, and it returns all the information that I need. Okay, the information is going to be returned in a JSON object that you need to traverse. We can, for instance, we can test our queries in a GraphQL API client. This is one of them, for instance. Let me clear this result. I don't know if this is going to work because maybe my authorization has expired, but let me try it out. Oh, it didn't work. I think this maybe I copied something incorrectly. Let me review that. No, it is okay. Let me do something here. I'm going to try to get a new API token, and I'm going to try to use it here. Send request. Okay, now it worked. It was the API token. So when you execute your query, this is what the GraphQL API is going to return. This is structure. This is JSON object. And then you can traverse that JSON object in your code and use it in your HTML file as normal. There are some questions on the chat window. So first, Kevin is asking about beta features. Yeah, so mutations are in beta. So Salesforce recommends to not use beta features in production because they may change simply because of that. So maybe you adopt the technology, you are using it in production, and then we slightly change the implementation, and that has a cost on you, an impact on you. That's why we recommend to test them out and to play with them, but not use them in production, or use them at your own risk. Okay? And then Rahul has another question about the query limit. What is the query limit and data retrieval limit for GraphQL wide adapter? Will this impact API limit? So basically, all the limits that you have in SQL are going to apply. Because behind the scenes, GraphQL is doing some SQL queries. So when that request arrives to the backend, it's being processed and transformed in a way that at the end is doing queries. And those queries are counting towards your limits. And yeah, the API limits count. Well, the API limit, I'm not sure. Let me take a look at it. GraphQL wire adapter limits. Let me take a look at the documentation. It's more the GraphQL API limit. No, I think they should count because you are reaching out an API. Okay, so they should count. In any case, investigate this a little further because, okay, yeah, we found it. GraphQL API uses the same API limits as other Connect API limits. GraphQL limits are still evolving and can change in a future release. Okay, so there you have the response. Could you recommend any tools specially designed for generating GraphQL schemas for Salesforce? Yeah, the one that I mentioned, Alter. Okay, so Alter is able to use introspection to find the data model that you have in your Salesforce organization. At the moment, it's not working because there is a bug. There is a bug open that the team is trying to fix so that you know. But here, you should be able to see your data model and be able to build your query, like taking a look at those objects and fields. So I recommend you to use this client, and also you can use GraphQL, it's another client, and you can use Postman. In Postman, we have a collection that contains thousands of examples of how to use the different Salesforce APIs. And we do have examples for GraphQL, okay? These ones, introspections, are the ones that are going to return your object schema. And these ones are examples of querying records once you know your object schema. GraphQL is also a very popular one in the third-party developer community. Okay. And this was a question from Kevin, and somebody has a really similar question. Okay. Somebody is also saying that you expect a SQL to GraphQL converter type tool. That would be amazing. I recommend you any ideas that you have like this one, put them in the idea exchange, because that is also something that our product managers take a look at in every release, and they prioritize their features also based in the idea exchange. So I recommend you put in your suggestion there. And then Erin is asking, in the example, we can see we retrieve account and contacts. That's this count at 2 queries. It counts as two SQL queries, because behind the scenes, the GraphQL API engine is doing 2 queries. Okay, but they arrive fast to your client because they arrive in one server round trip only. That's the benefit. Fantastic. So here I leave you some resources, and let's go with the next feature, which was the #1 requested feature, dynamic components. So with dynamic components, you can decide on runtime which Lightning Web component you are going to render. You define a placeholder, and in that placeholder, you can render later at any moment that you need the component, the final component that you want to have there. It's important to adopt this feature also with some caution, because it can detriment performance if you don't do it in the right way. Everything is explained in the documentation. So if you plan to adopt dynamic components, go to the documentation and read which is the correct way of using the feature. And again, we have some demos. Let's go to LWC recipes and dynamic components. I have them in the JavaScript tab. Here it is. Okay, so this is a parent component in which I'm rendering a child component, and the child component is going to be different, a different component, depending on the value that I select here. So the currently selected component is called light contact details. And if I select full, this is going to load a different component. It's not something that I'm doing with CSS or anything. This example is just a different component. And we can take a look at the source. This is not merged by the way. It's here in pull requests. Why is not merged? Because unlocked packages are not yet supported, and we are using an unlocked package to distribute LWC recipes. But we will merge it in the next release, which is when unlocked packages are planned to go out, and this safe harbor. Okay. So let me show you the implementation. Okay, this is the recipe. So this is the HTML file for the recipe, and we define a placeholder. You define that with LWC component, and you say, this component is going to be something, a property that I have in my JavaScript file, but that will have a value at some point. But we are not referencing the component in here. We are just defining the placeholder. And it is on the JavaScript file where we assign a value to that component constructor property. How do we do it? Well, every time that we change that, I don't remember the name of combo box. Every time that we change the combo box, we call this method assign constructor. And what we do is to, we use mapping that I define here that says that if I have full in the combo box, I need to import contact tile. And if I have light, I need to import contact tile light, which are different components. This is loading at the beginning so that my component files are loaded and it doesn't have performance implications. And then I assign that constructor depending on the value that's selected in the combo box. And I'm also selected that in the connected callback to initialize the component. Is it correct? A really good use case for this feature is to use it for UI configuration in an App Exchange app. So for instance, you could have a component in your App Exchange app that renders differently depending a configuration value that the subscriber, the customer that installed the app, selects. That would be amazing, but that will be possible once the feature works in packages. I leave you here again some more resources. Great, so we have arrived to spring 24. I hope that you are still here with me. I think yes, because I'm seeing some great questions on the chat. Indeed, we have one more question from Valentin Bilenki. Is it possible to pre-cache the dynamic component so it loads faster? That is exactly what I'm doing here. This is going to cache the components when the component loads for the first time. And we are going to call that to use those cache components in here. Okay, this would be like the correct way to do it. The incorrect way to do it would be to do these imports in here, because that would mean that the import would be happening just when this method is called. But this way, they are called at the beginning. It's a really, really great question. Thank you, Valentin. Fantastic. So let's go with our next feature, which is the Workspace API. If you have worked with Lightning Console apps, I'm sure that you know that there was an API to use tabs and subtabs programmatically in Aura components. This is the second most requested feature last year. And it's been really delivered. It's been delivered as GA. Everything that I'm covering today is GA, except the mutations thing that I mentioned that I didn't actually cover or demo. So we're fine. Okay, so with this Workspace API, I've read that we have implemented it in a slightly more efficient way, something to bear in mind. And again, best way to see this is via LWC recipes. So because this API only works for console apps, I created a new console app, LWC recipes. And in this console app, you are going to find like a launcher, because tabs need to be open at tabs so you can interact with them with the API programmatically. And now that we have this tab open, we can play with it with code. So all these recipes are LWC components that are using the Workspace API, and they are going to interact with your tabs and subtabs in console apps. So for instance, let's say that I want to open a tab. I can do that. I can do that in code in the Workspace API. I'm going to show you the code later. Let's say that I want to open that same tab, but in a subtab, which is a feature of console apps, opening subtabs. Well, it was not contacts, it was accounts, but any tab I can open here as a subtab. Let's go back to our examples here. So let's pay attention here, Workspace API. We are going to change that tab label. That's something that we can do. We can also change the tab icon. Look, now we have an amazing Cody beer here. Bear, not beer. We can also highlight the tab. And there are like many different configurations for highlighting this tab to tell customers that we are doing something with that tab, okay? With our code, our components. I can focus on next tab, for instance, and I can even disable this close button that we have here. All these recipes work from the utility bar. Indeed, here I have one more, which allows me to close the focus tab. So let's do it. Oh, it's not working. Why? Maybe because it was highlighted? No, it's not working properly. I don't know why. I will report that. Let me open another tab. It works if it's the contact list, but it is not letting me close this tab. Ah, it's because I disabled the close button. So this was working before. So probably the team has fixed that. So if you remove the close button, you cannot close the tab. Probably, because I did this demo like a few days ago, and I clicked on all the recipes, and I was able to close the tab. But it's okay. It's a good behavior, I believe. Probably a fixed bug that I didn't know about. Well, in any case, how do you implement these recipes? So very easy. All the workspace API methods are on the platform workspace API module, and you just need to import them and use them in your code. A best practice is there is an is console navigation property that you can import. So you can check if the app or if the Lightning Web Component is placed in a console navigation app before calling the methods. That's a best practice. And then you just call the methods. The methods are async methods, so you can call them using promises or using async await. Okay, I'm seeing here that somebody already raised the idea for SQL to GraphQL converter already in the idea exchange. So all the people who are listening or watching, if you are interested in this tool, please vote the idea. And probably Amit can add the idea to the resources of the presentation, so the rest of the people can also vote it if they like it. Amazing. So Workspace API, again, very useful for those who use Lightning Console apps. And here I leave you some resources. Okay, second feature from this release, and we are almost at the end. We are at time, but I'm going to explain this very quick. So this is the record picker component. If you've been working with Lightning Web Components for some time, you may know about the lookup component that Philip O'Seal created, which was open source. My colleague Philip O'Seal created that, and many people have been using it. It was a component that allowed you to select records. So our internal teams have been working in similar solutions, but I have to say that it is more advanced because it has a lot of capabilities. So the most important thing to bear in mind about this component is that it has a lot of flexibility, because you can select like which are the fields that are going to match to whatever you are typing here, which are the fields that we want to display here. We can add filtering, we can add validation. It's been created also for the mobile offline use case. Everything that we create lately for LWC, we have mobile offline users in mind. And there are many advanced capabilities on the roadmap, because at the moment, this component uses SQL for searching, but we are working on adding social querying, which is going to be very great. We are also working on quick actions integration, most recently used records functionality, and a native multi-select capability. So say that, again, we have some recipes. Let me go back to our main LWC recipes app. And here we have a record picker tab. In this tab, you have several recipes that use this component. Let's take a look at this one. For instance, this one allows me to look for an account and select it. And this one allows me to select multiple contacts and adds them as pills right below the component. So this is not a native multi-select capability, but it's a workaround that works pretty well. So if we take a look at the component, let's take a look at this one, for instance. It's very easy. Let's take a look at the HTML file to use it, because everything works with configuration. You simply define the record picker component and you configure it with all the properties that you want to set and that you want to pass to it. For instance, the display information, the matching information, the validation, and so on. So very, very useful. And last thing, the instrumentation API. If you have ever wondered if there is a way to have observability of what users are doing with your components, now there is. So this is a new module, Lightning Logger, that you import and that you can use to log messages. So for instance, you can keep track of which buttons your users are clicking or at which point they are abandoning the page. Would be useful for user experience design, for instance, or any ideas that you can have in mind. I have to say that to use this feature, you need to have an event monitoring license, because those logs are added to the event monitoring log files. It is a new event log file event called Lightning Logger event, and you need event monitoring to be able to examine those logs and to see the messages that were logged. But despite of that, it's a very, very useful feature. And probably if you are already using event monitoring, you will find this useful. Okay, so again, resources, and I leave you here the link for the deck. I'm also going to copy it. Let me see if I have it here. If I can copy the link directly in the chat, give me a second. There you have. Okay, you have also the link on the chat, and you can download this deck, take a look at all the resources. You can clone LWC recipes to see everything in action yourself and try it out. With that, we have arrived to the end of the presentation. I'm not sure if you have any more questions for me. Yes, the file requires access. I need to give you access. Just request access and I will need to give you. As it's on my Salesforce Google Drive, I cannot grant, there's no possibility of opening it for everyone. I need to give individual access, but don't worry, I will give it as soon as I receive the requests, okay? Any questions